Welcome to Sales Tax and More, your go-to resource for all things state tax related. Now, here is your host, Michael Fleming.
Hi, Mike Fleming here, founder of Sales Tax and More, and today's co-host of the Sales Tax and More podcast, where we talk about everybody's favorite topic, which is, of course, sales tax. Today, we're going to be discussing sales tax trends with Sonia Ekmekjian. I'm sorry if I butchered that.
It's perfect.
Okay. But we're going to be discussing, current sales tax trends. We're 2 years out from the Wayfair case. And, before we get into all of this, I'd like to introduce you to my co-host, Ellie Moffett.
Hey everyone, it's really great to be here. Excited to have Sonia on today. And before we get into the meat of this here, I'm going to do a quick introduction for Sales Tax and More. Sales Tax and More is a full service consulting and solutions firm. We have a really great team here of experienced tax professionals who are very dedicated to fulfilling your state tax and related needs. So we do a lot of returns, registrations, consultations, research, and like our name states, more. So if you have questions about our services or have questions for Sonia, we will give you plenty of ways to reach out to us in this podcast episode and in the show notes as well. So I'm going to give it back to you, Mike, and we can keep going.
Yeah, great. So Sonia is very accomplished. Let me tell you a little bit about her. She right now she's with Avalara, but she's got over 28 years of experience in transaction tax services and consulting. She brings a wealth of expertise with particular strengths in areas such as strategic alliances, relationship management, executive collaboration, M&A due diligence, project management, professional services, and product management in all consulting and software environments. Sonia promotes cross-functional collaboration and team building while driving maximum value satisfaction to an organization. Over the years, Sonia has established herself as a thought leader in the field of transactional tax automation. She's got great, deep industry information. She has experience working for a state tax agency, administering sales and use taxes, Big Four accounting firm experience, tax software experience, mid-market consulting experience. She's got a bachelor's of business administration from the University of Southern California. She's also a California certified public accountant. So Sonia, we appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us today. Before we jump in, you want to say a quick hi?
Hello, everyone. Well, Ellie and Mike, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here. I'm excited to talk to you about everyone's favorite topic today. So thank you for allowing me to be here.
Thank you. So, as I mentioned earlier, we're 2 years past Wayfair. And Wayfair is the U.S. Supreme Court case, of course, that did away with the need for a physical presence when determining nexus, which simply means that now just having sales into a state can trigger a requirement to collect taxes. And I know you know all this. Just for our audience, I'm giving a little bit of background. So, Avalara has a whole bunch of customers. They have a whole bunch of interaction with the sales tax world. What are you seeing? What is Avalara seeing?
Yeah, it's definitely changed the dynamics of what we're all dealing with. It's interesting, Mike. The states were fairly quick in adopting their rules, but what we're finding is that retailers, not so much, right? And anytime they change, the authorities change rules to simplify things, it almost seems like they make it more complicated, right? So it's not easy for our clients to really adopt this. I mean, there's so many components, every jurisdiction has specific rules and thresholds, and registration can be a bare collection. It's so labor intensive. So what we're seeing is that states were quick to adopt, but not so much the organizations. And there, partially awareness, the complexity But I will say there was a lot of people who comply. We've been very busy, but I think we're not there yet. And I don't know if that's consistent with what you're seeing with your client base.
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing some of the same, Sona, and it's really a little bit frustrating sometimes because when they first imposed this, they were doing it prospectively only, and no one had any past exposure because of this. But now, 2 years past, some of these, thresholds are getting old. States like Maine and some of the other early adapters, have a July 1st, 2018 start date. So we're literally, 2 years out, and they're starting to get aggressive
Yeah.
and pursue people. So,
It's an interesting point because I think that aggressiveness, and the current environment we live in, where these states are going to need more money because of the financial situation, I think they're going to come down harder on these companies. So that's not going to help us at all.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like a perfect storm. I mean, the states, from our point of view, were gearing up to come after sellers because not everyone's compliant just for economic nexus. But now we have this pandemic closures and the recessions and the shortage of funds. And, historically, when states come out of a recession, they step up their enforcement, they step up their discovery. So we already had them coming, and now this just,
Yeah,
intensifies the need for them to be coming.
absolutely.
Yeah, Sona, you were just talking a little bit about what Avalara was seeing, and I know we all saw a survey come out about that. Can you share the findings of the survey Avalara did on that, and just kind of what it was about and what you found?
Yeah, absolutely. It was actually, the results were interesting, but not overly surprising, right? And when Avalara did this survey, we were basically trying to gauge impacts of Wayfair and on attitudes and behaviors related to selling and what organizations were doing. And we surveyed really the three market segments, the ESP, the SMB, and the enterprise. And across these market segments, we had about 750 respondents. And the timeline of this was anywhere from December 2019 to April 2020. And the findings were interesting, Ellie. I'll throw some of the facts out there. What we learned is that the smaller market segment, the ESP, they were the most unaware, but the greatest impacted, which really doesn't surprise us, right? This market segments can go over the threshold. They don't know what the thresholds are. Even if they do, they don't know how to track and monitor it. They don't have as much automation. So that was kind of interesting. What we also learned was approximately 50% were aware of Wayfair related laws, but many retailers were still unaware of the rulings and the impacts to them. So there's still a lot of companies there that we need to educate and get them on board, get them compliant. And finally, the other thing I want to say is that although 60% said they understood, only 45% said that they were registered to collect. So in a nutshell, if you summarize our findings, it's very obvious that there's still a good percentage of retailers out there that are not compliant because they don't know or they don't have the automation in place. So we still, I think as software companies and consultants, I still think we still have a lot of work, despite the fact we're 2+ years into this.
Yeah, I think that we are seeing the same type of thing out there, Sona. But one thing that surprises me is that we still have people, that tell us, well, we're waiting for Congress to step in and save everyone. Or we're waiting for another case at the Supreme Court. Well, while they're waiting for these things, the exposure, their liability is just growing on a daily basis. And, if we're waiting for Congress, I tell everybody, we're probably not going to see the benefit of that. For some things, Congress has always been do nothing. Like we go back to 1959 and Public Law 86-272, that was the last time Congress weighed in, or the only time Congress weighed in on a nexus case. It was an income tax nexus case, but they said that nexus was so confusing that, they had to form committees and do studies in order to come out with a permanent solution. So this was a temporary solution. That was 61 years ago. We still have this temporary solution, so maybe our great grandchildren may benefit from something that Congress does. But I don't think that waiting for a fix from Congress is going to happen anytime soon. And likewise, the Supreme Court may or may not hear another case. So,
yeah, I agree with you. Look at how long it's kind of taken for us to get here, right?
Right.
And while they're waiting, exposure is increasing, right? So it's audits, risks are increasing. So, it's going to be challenging times for some of these companies.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we kind of briefly mentioned automation in there when you were talking, and the impacts that Wayfair has had. Let's talk about the impact COVID's having on the need for automation. Sona, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Wow, COVID changed everything, right? Personally, professionally, and did any of us ever think we would be in this situation? I would have never thought I'd be homeschooling two kids, that's for sure. But it changed the whole supply chain, business operations, buying habits, travel. We're all stuck here and we can't travel anymore. But end of the day, it forced a lot of companies to shut their doors, right? And people had to do something. So they started looking for alternatives and they turned to e-commerce, right? Which really magnified the Wayfair impact. Overnight, they were selling into regions that they didn't before, creating more reporting responsibility, compliance responsibility for them. And in a lot of cases, these organizations were ambitious and they went global, right? And that just introduced another set of exposures, was probably a topic for a separate discussion. So overnight, I think it magnified the Wayfair exposure. And what we're seeing is that it even justifies more the need for automation, right? They need to register in more jurisdictions. They need to calculate. They need to compute. They need to file. And all of that is now magnified.
Yeah,
is that consistent what what you're seeing out there, Mike?
Yeah, it really is. Not only people who are starting new businesses, but companies that may have been, purely wholesale in the past. If the brick and mortar stores aren't buying, then, the wholesalers have no business. So we've seen a number of them going directly to the consumer through the internet. So
That's
all
true.
sorts of we've seen a major explosion in e-commerce, and it's coming from all different areas. Some of them you can expect, and some of them I find a little bit, surprising.
Yeah.
But what types of other trends are you seeing in the marketplace right now?
It hasn't changed too much, right? Automation, everyone's trying to scale. And, Wayfair or no Wayfair, I think a lot of clients were trying to do more with less, and you do that by automating, streamlining, improving your processes. So that's definitely been a trend and continues to be a bigger trend. Organizations are moving to cloud-based solutions, right? That was already the trend when you looked at it, but I think in the COVID situation, it magnified. I know companies who couldn't do compliance because they weren't in their offices. So I think right now, organizations that really like the premise version are saying, well, we need to be prepared for everything. So I think that what we're seeing is that the whole cloud solution is even more of a trend now, globalization. And, that was again a trend, but I think it's accelerated. It's so easy to go global, right? Through e-commerce. Globalization is another trend we're seeing. But an interesting other trend, I've read a lot, Mike, about salt consulting, right? I think with everything going on in the marketplace and the impacts of COVID, I think a lot of companies are looking to consultants like yourselves for a lot of advisory, whether it's exposure analysis, VDAs, nexus studies. That's also, I think accounting firms are growing, but the SOLT practices are growing more because of everything what we're dealing with.
Yes, absolutely. And that touches on one of my follow-up questions for you. Obviously firms like ourselves that specialize in state and local taxes, SALT. This is, a lot of people need these services. But what about, CPAs, other accounting professionals? Are you seeing any trends where they're starting to talk to their clients about sales tax because of how big an impact Wayfair is? Traditionally or historically, a lot of these firms, they didn't really concentrate too much on sales tax because a lot of them didn't have the client base to justify talking to, multi-state sales tax issues. A lot of their clients just had, single state or regional issues. But now, because of Wayfair, they could have issues all over the country. So are you seeing more accountants and CPAs get involved? And if so, how can Avalara help them?
Yeah, so I lead the accounting channel here at Avalara, Mike, and I've been reading a lot about accounting trends and what accountant, and talking to a lot of people. And the biggest trend I see is specialization, right? Accounting firms want to be the one-stop shop for their clients, which means they're growing in areas they didn't before. And with all the dynamics in the marketplace, clearly SALT and automation is top on their list. So what we're seeing is, firms are trying to expand in areas they didn't to be that one-stop shop for their clients. So what Avalara has been doing is we're in the process of launching a product offering specifically for the accounting community. So we're going to take solutions that we use today and enable our partners, such as yourself, to use it to provide your services. So we see that trend. We're in front of it. You'll be hearing a lot more about those in the future.
That's absolutely wonderful. I think there's a big place in the market right now for these types of tools and programs. So when you do roll it out, perhaps we could have you back on and talk about some of the specifics.
Absolutely. I'd love to come back for that.
Okay. Well, we really appreciate you coming on today and sharing your thoughts and ideas and what Avalara is seeing out there. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be here.
Thank you so much, Sona. How can people reach out to you if they want to get in touch with you or work with you?
Ellie, the best way to reach out to me is through email. And my email address is sona.akmekjian@avalara.com. And I will spell that for you, SONA.AKMAKJIAN@avalara.com.
Thank you so much, and we will link that in the notes as well. If you have questions about sales tax and our services at Sales Tax and More, you can also reach out directly to me. That's E Moffat, that's EMOFFAT @salestaxandmore.com. You can also visit our website at www.salestaxandmore.com. I know we have a lot of services and resources on our website, so does Avalara, so please check those out, and thank you so much for listening today.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us on today's episode of the Sales Tax and More podcast, and we hope to see you on the next one. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe and check out all of the resources we have out on the web.